Gaul, 451 AD. The air is thick with dust and fear. Across the Catalonian plains, two worlds are about to collide. To the west, Rome, fractured and fading, marching under tattered standards. To the east, a tide of horsemen led by the most feared man alive, Attila the Hun. The Western Roman Empire was dying, but before the light went out forever, it burned one last time. Bright, defiant, and unforgettable. This is the story of Flavius Aetius, the man history calls the last of the Romans, and of Rome's final victory. By the middle of the 5th century, Rome was no longer an empire of conquest. The legions that had once ruled continents were gone, scattered, disbanded, or replaced by mercenaries. Civil wars, invasions, and corruption had stripped away the empire's strength. Its greatest provinces, Gaul, Spain, Africa, were slipping away. The emperors ruled not from Rome, but from Ravenna, a fortress surrounded by marshes. To the north, Gothic kingdoms were forming on Roman soil. To the west, Vandals ruled from Carthage. And from beyond the Danube came a new power, swift, brutal, and unstoppable: the Huns. The Huns were born of the steppe, horsemen who could live, fight, and die in the saddle. They struck without warning, moving faster than any army in history. To the settled peoples of Europe, they seemed like a natural disaster, a storm that could not be reasoned with. Their leader, Attila, commanded a confederation stretching from the Black Sea to the Rhine. For years, he had forced both Eastern and Western Rome to pay him tribute, gold in exchange for peace. But by 451 AD, tribute no longer satisfied him. He wanted conquest. His army, Huns, Ostrogoths, Gepids, and countless others, swept into Gaul, burning cities as it came. Rheims, Metz, and Orleans all fell. Paris braced for siege. The Western Empire seemed helpless. Only one man still commanded enough respect to stop him: Flavius Aetius. Born on the frontier around 391 AD, Aetius was both Roman and outsider. As a youth, he had been held hostage, first by the Visigoths, then by the Huns. A prisoner who became a student of his enemies. He learned their languages, their tactics, and their psychology. By his 40s, he was Magister Militum, the empire's top general. He had kept the Western Empire alive not by glory, but by diplomacy and cunning. He knew the empire's truth. Rome could no longer fight alone. So when Attila invaded, Aetius did something extraordinary. He united Rome's enemies under her banner. He persuaded Theodoric I, king of the Visigoths, to stand with him. He rallied Franks, Burgundians, and Alans. Tribes that had once destroyed Roman legions now gathered to defend what was left of Rome's world. In June 451, the two armies met on the Catalonian plains, near modern-day Châlons-en-Champagne. Attila's forces numbered perhaps 200,000. A coalition of steppe archers, Gothic infantry, and Germanic warriors. Aetius commanded far fewer, maybe half that number, but his troops held the high ground, and his coalition was united by purpose, if not loyalty. On the Roman left stood Aetius's legions and allied infantry. In the center, the Alans, fierce but unreliable, and on the right, Theodoric's Visigoths, disciplined, proud, and ready to die where they stood. The stage was set for one of antiquity's bloodiest days. Attila struck first. His horsemen advanced in thunderous waves, loosing clouds of arrows that hissed through the evening air. The Alans in the center wavered under the storm, but Aetius, calm amid chaos, rode the line, ordering reserves forward, holding the formation together. On the right, Theodoric's Goths met Attila's Gothic allies in savage combat. Shields shattered, men screamed, horses fell. Theodoric was thrown from his horse and trampled, but his son, Thorismund, seized command and drove the enemy uphill in fury. As the sun dipped low, the Visigoths countercharged, smashing Attila's flank and driving his men back toward their wagons. In the center, the Romans advanced, shield walls locking step by step, pushing the Huns into their own lines. By nightfall, Attila was trapped behind a barricade of wagons, his army bloodied, his aura of invincibility broken. He prepared for death, some say building a pyre of saddles to burn himself if captured. But the killing stopped with the dark. When dawn came, the plains were silent. Tens of thousands lay dead, Theodoric among them, his body borne from the field on his shield. Attila had survived, barely. His army withdrew eastward, harassed by Aetius's scouts, but never again victorious in Gaul. Rome had won, not through strength of empire, but through unity of necessity. It was victory carved from desperation. Aetius did not pursue Attila. He understood his coalition was fragile. The Goths wanted to avenge their king. The Alans wanted plunder. If he pressed too far, they would turn on each other. So Aetius held the field, secured Gaul, and let Attila retreat. The peace did not last. In 452, Attila invaded Italy. He destroyed Aquileia, razed towns across the Po Valley, and advanced toward Rome itself. Famine and plague followed his army like shadows. The emperor fled, and the empire seemed on the verge of collapse. But then something strange happened. Near the river Mincio, Attila met Pope Leo I. What was said between them remains unknown, but soon after, Attila withdrew. Whether moved by diplomacy, superstition, or sickness, he turned back across the Alps, and a year later, he was dead. Aetius, the savior of the West, returned to Ravenna a hero, but power breeds envy. Emperor Valentinian III, easily swayed by courtiers, grew jealous of his general's fame. On a September afternoon in 454 AD, during a routine meeting at court, Valentinian drew his sword and struck Aetius down with his own hand. One witness is said to have told him, "You have cut off your right hand with your left." The remark proved prophetic. Without Aetius, the Western Empire had no defense. Within a year, Valentinian himself was assassinated. 22 years later, the Western Empire was gone. Historians still debate how decisive Catalonian plains truly was. The Huns returned once more. The empire still fell, but strategically, it delayed the inevitable collapse of the West. Had Attila conquered Gaul, the Gothic, Frankish, and Burgundian kingdoms that shaped medieval Europe might never have formed as they did. For one fleeting moment, Rome and her former enemies stood together, not for empire, but for civilization. That, more than territory or treasure, was Aetius's achievement. Today, the plains near Chalons are peaceful farmland. The soil has long covered the bones of those who fought there. No monuments stand, but the silence carries a weight. The end of one age and the birth of another. Here, Rome's story changed direction. The legions of the empire gave way to the warlords of medieval Europe. Yet the discipline, the organization, the Roman spirit, they endured, reshaped into new worlds. Flavius Aetius was not a conqueror like Caesar, nor a reformer like Augustus. He was something rarer, a man who held a collapsing world together by intellect alone. He understood that Rome's survival no longer meant expansion, but preservation, the careful management of decline without surrendering identity. For that, later generations would call him the last of the Romans. He lived in an age when glory was no longer possible, and yet somehow achieved it. Aetius and Attila were opposites and mirrors. Each commanded multi-ethnic armies. Each balanced diplomacy and war with brilliance. Each embodied his civilization's strengths and its decay. They were men of a dying world, one trying to end Rome, the other trying to prolong it. Their conflict marked the final act of classical antiquity. When Attila retreated and Aetius stood victorious, it was not merely Rome that triumphed, but the idea of order itself. For one last time, Rome's victory on the Catalonian plains was brief, but it was real. It proved that even in ruin, discipline, leadership, and conviction could still overcome chaos. Within a generation, the empire would fall, but the ideals that Aetius fought for, organization, alliance, reason, would echo for centuries. They would shape the medieval church, the rule of law, and the very concept of Western civilization. Rome's last great victory was not about conquest. It was about endurance, the refusal to vanish quietly. At the Catalonian plains, Rome remembered what it was, not an empire of marble or wealth, but a system of order, courage, and belief in something greater than survival. That is why we still remember this battle, because it shows that even at the end, Rome was still Rome. Empires fall, but ideas endure. And sometimes, in their final moments, they show the very qualities that made them great in the first place. Flavius Aetius could not save the empire's body, but he preserved its soul. For one last day, on a field in Gaul, he reminded the world that civilization can still stand its ground. That was Rome's last great victory.